Recorded. And that's good. Okay. So we want to thank everyone for being here. Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is personal. We do have our full schedule. Now we are down basically to one more episode for this semester. Next week, the episode will be on marine biodiversity in the Caribbean. And that will be our last for this semester. And the entire schedule for next semester for spring could be found at this link, or you could use the QR code to get to it as well. So this semester I've started all of our Environmental Fridays with just a quick reflection on this iconic photograph. It is reputedly one of the most iconic photographs in human history. It records our blue planet, our home, from the perspective of the moon. I think this was Apollo 8, and it has the distinction of starting or triggering movements and celebrations such as Earth Day. If you want to view an interview of the Apollo astronaut that took this picture. So in the foreground, you could see that's in the foreground there, that's the moon. And there's the blue planet, our home, in the back there. And it, for me, engenders a lot of positive thoughts. And we wanted to get each episode, at least this semester, started with a little reflection on that. So yeah, if you want to see and hear an interview of the photographer, the astronaut that took this picture, you could basically go in and hit search for Earthrise interview in YouTube, or you could use this QR code that we have here. Right? So today my co-host is a colleague and friend. He's professor of English at Andrews University. His specialty, as you could see here, is 19th century British literature, creative writing. He has a very special class on social justice and a graphic novel. And he has several pastimes here. I think I've seen him play the guitar before, and I for sure have listened to some of his poetry before. So he is a very well-rounded, talented. What does it mean to be a fitness enthusiast? Scott, it means different things to different people, but what does it mean for you?
Yeah, well, it means not sitting in the couch too long at one time
Okay.
and trying to keep all the body parts functioning.
All right, that sounds good. That sounds good. So you will hear some more from Scott when he introduces our guest speaker and when he facilitates our Q&A. Our special feature for today is coming from Derek Pelk, P-E-L-C, Pelk. Is that correct?
That's right.
So someone needs to mute themselves here. So he's the chief naturalist and park manager at Love Creek County Park, which is a place I'm pretty familiar with. Go up there often to walk, to relax, and listen to music and all of that type of stuff. It's not very far here from Andrews University. So yeah, we want to make sure everybody has their, yeah, okay, it's muted. So for the next 5 to 7 minutes, we will hear from Derek. I will stop sharing my screen now. Okay.
All good. All right. Well, thanks, Desmond. Good morning, everyone. And like he said, my name is Derek Pelk. I am the chief naturalist for the Berrien County Parks. Really happy to be here with y'all this morning, out at a very wet Love Creek County Park. And I know some of you are zooming in from other places, but with Andrews University being so close, I just wanted to provide everybody with a little bit of information about our hidden gem here in Southwest Michigan and just show you around our nature center a little bit in hopes that if you are in the area, you come check us out, or if you do live in the area but haven't been here yet, that you come see us. And so with that, I'm going to try to turn my screen around so you're not just looking at me here. And even though it's gloomy, I'll kind of explain the park a little bit, and I can kind of give you an idea of our trailheads here, but it is raining. So Love Creek County Park is one of our, was our first county park out of 7 today. It was established back in 1976. And we focus a lot on environmental education, recreation, and conservation. Love Creek is roughly 200 acres of natural area outside of Berrien Springs, Michigan. We have roughly 9 miles of hiking trails that provide access to a variety of habitats. One of the most popular being our mature beech maple forest that explodes with ephemeral wildflowers in the spring. And so we get a lot of people that come out and check out those amazing wildflowers that can survive, because we still have a lot of winter weather happening in March and April. And so these flowers and plants can still thrive through some of those late frosts and things of that nature. So we also have a 3.5 mile mountain bike trail that you can come check out. All of our naturalist services are based out of Love Creek Nature Center, where we focus on environmental education, and we have activities going on throughout the year. We do host numerous school groups, and we participate in the Berrien Springs Parent Partnership Homeschool Program. We offer several types of other programs, from learning about winter adaptation, invasive species identification, woodcock walks, and even group mountain bike rides. So with that little bit of information, we're going to go ahead and walk into the Nature Center here real quick and show you around. Here is our front desk and our park's naturalist, Lamanda. Hi, Lamanda. We're going to head around over to our right, to our Trillium room. This is where we host all of our on-site school and public programs. We also rent out the room for business meetings, birthdays, and even weddings. And then in the winter, we also use this room as a ski warming room, because we have the fireplace. We also have some nice viewing windows. I hope everybody can see this. This is my first time walking around Zooming. So if I'm going too fast, just be like, slow down.
We're seeing it. We're seeing it.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we're going to go ahead and make our way to the other side of the building. I'll talk about
Are those mountain bikes?
So these are fat tire bikes. So when it does start snowing, we bring these out and we actually groom the snow. And these wider tires can actually get a lot more traction on the snow and won't sink into it. So it's a pretty fun, exhilarating thing to do in the winter. So here is our display and exhibit room. So we have a lot of informative graphics in here, different kids activities, and then all of our live animal exhibits are in here also. And so we use our animal ambassadors for educational programs. And really quickly, I want to introduce you to 2 of our educational ambassadors. The first one, I'm going to get in here a little bit so everybody can take a peek. This is Julio. I know it's dark, but Julio is a non-releasable rehabbed eastern screech owl. So he was likely hit by a car at one time and injured his wing and is no longer able to fly and hunt. Eastern screech owls are nocturnal carnivores, and we use him for our owl programs and just try to provide him the best life we can while we're educating the public about owls. So they also have some nice bird viewing or ravine view windows with bird feeders out here in our display and exhibit room as well. A few more of our animal habitats through here, again, that we use for educational purposes. And then here we have Katie, and Katie is not the salamander. Katie is our other parks naturalist here. So this is a tiger salamander, and tiger salamanders, they are our largest terrestrial salamander. And while they spend most of their time underground, they do come out to migrate to their vernal pools during breeding time. So that's oftentimes in certain wet areas and heavy rains, you could actually see different species, but especially tiger salamanders crossing the road. So always be on the lookout for those little guys early in spring. And the last thing I really want to show you is our ski rental area. So during the winter, almost 95% of our trails are converted to winter recreation. So cross-country skiing, skate style skiing, snowshoeing, and fat tire biking. Those bikes that we showed you here there in our entryway are so people can come out, rent skis, rent the fat bikes, rent the snowshoes. But we're still waiting on that snow. It looks like we're going to continue to get more rain than snow here throughout most of the rest of December. So, but if we have a good snow year, winter is by far our busiest time here at Love Creek Nature Center. We'll have full parking lots every weekend if we are skiing, snowshoeing, and doing those things. So,
okay.
But yeah, I hope that real quick special feature made y'all want to come out and check out the Nature Center. I know it's quick, but there's a lot of different things to view and a lot of nature to see. So with that, if we have time, I can take any questions.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question. Hopefully, it might be something that our students might be interested in. Do you have opportunities for student internships, for students to come work, volunteer? You know,
We don't have an internship program started at this time, but we do are kind of trying to get a volunteer program established. So if they gauge interest in a certain aspect, and we can offer them an opportunity to learn a bit more about their interest, we would be happy to set something up.
all right, sounds good. Does anybody else have a quick question here for Derek?
Real quick, I was wondering if they had sledding.
We do not have sledding at this time, but I would like to say that just down the road, there is a place called Five Pines, and they do offer sledding at Five Pines.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But so what you have here is you cater for bad weather as well as good weather. Even if the weather's bad, you still got plenty to do indoors in your center, right?
Correct. I mean, we have different exhibits, different activities for kids. And again, like the bird viewing windows, which are even a little bit active, even in this rain right now. There's some titmice and black-capped chickadees hanging out on the feeders now. So, yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited. Can we get a website, contact information, hours?
Yeah, so we do have a Facebook page you're welcome to check out. We also have a website on our county. So if you go to Berrien County website, go to parks and then click Love Creek, you can find a whole lot of information right there. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., but the trails are open sun up to sundown. So even if you don't get here at the time that the Nature Center is open, we always like to keep our trails open so that people can come out and use them when they want. We do have some small fees, but again, the trails are always open when the sun up to sundown.
Yep. All right, Derek, thank you so very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I will be visiting again.
All right, great. Thank y'all.
But thank you very much. All right. So next we are going to, let's make sure I get back to, all right. Is everyone seen my screen again? Yes. So at this time, Scott, it's your turn to introduce our guest speaker.
Great. Before I do that, I'll just say one word. I had a niece who got married and had a wedding reception at Love Creek about 5 years ago. She's from Argentina and wasn't that long in the country, and she scheduled her wedding reception for October 20. And I was thinking outdoor time, October 20, doesn't sound good. But it turned out to be a beautiful day, weather in the upper 50s, sunny, calm, and we had a beautiful time there. So Love Creek really came through with us.
Yes, yes, yes. I've seen some of those things there from time to time too.
That's great to
Okay.
hear, Scott.
Good ad.
So here we go. We are very privileged today to have Jessica J. Lee with us. I'll read her, like official bio, and then I'll say a few words of personal introduction for her talk today. Jessica J. Lee is a British, Canadian, Taiwanese author, environmental historian, and winner of the Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction, the Boardman Tasker Award for Mountain Literature, the Banff Mountain Book Award, and the RBC Taylor Prize Emerging Writer Award. She's author of 3 books of nature writing, Turning, Two Trees Make a Forest, which I have here, and Dispersals, which is forthcoming, co-editor of the essay collection Dog-Hearted, and her first children's book with an illustrator, Elaine Chen, is A Garden Called Home, also forthcoming. She has a PhD in environmental history and aesthetics and was writer in residence at the Leibniz Institute for Freshwater Ecology in Berlin from 2017 to 2018. She is the founding editor of the Willow Herb Review and teaches creative writing at the University of Cambridge. So I want to read just 2 short paragraphs from the end of chapter 2 of her book, Two Trees Make a Forest, and just make a comment about the kind of writing that at least appears in this book. This is set on the island of Taiwan. At the peak of Shangshan, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, where a number of boulders cluster at the precipice, groups gather to take selfies. I roam onward to where the hill slips away and a view of the city opens outward. A checkered beige of tower, blocks speckled with dark windows, the metal blue glass of Taipei 101, once the world's tallest skyscraper, stretching above them. Hushan, Tiger Mountain, is to the east, its trailhead emerging near the end of my road. On quiet days, I amble its slopes, idly, umbrella held tightly over my body to stave off the rain that falls from the canopy. It is here that I wander above the city, my family called home, and that I watch the gray streets rolling out into the hills, the city expanding at a rate faster than the movement of mountains. Professor Lee finds her spot in this book at the intersection of the urban landscape and the natural landscape, an astute observer of the interplay between the natural world and the structures and impact of human presence. It's a beautiful story that combines memoir, naturalistic observation, and history of the landscape and its formation. It's a unique kind of writing. I haven't experienced quite that kind of writing ever before, and it's beautiful. So I encourage you to take a look at that book and her other writing. I look forward so much, Professor Lee, to learning from what you have to share with us. The time is yours.
All right, very good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Desmond and Scott. I'm really, really glad to be here, and it's lovely to see all of you. So I'm gonna share my screen if that's all right. Just pull up some slides. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna talk for a little bit, and I'll leave lots of room for questions at the end. The title of the talk is The Role of Literature in Environmental Movements, which I realize is sort of a broad title, and as I sat down to write this talk, I found myself sort of thinking about a lot of things, but the core thing was about emotions. So I'd like you all, if you will, to entertain me, to picture a scene. So in this scene, I picture myself, but you might picture yourself and a similar kind of moment that took place for you, perhaps. So I picture myself around the age of 14, picking up a book from the school library.
So right now we are seeing just a green
Yeah.
screen.
Perfect, that's fine.
Is that
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
good.
just making sure.
Yeah. So I was at this time researching for a school project about civic engagement for my civics class, it was called. I was putting together a presentation about different environmental activist groups. And the book I picked up was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. This exact edition, which is like one of the original first editions. I picked it up from the library. Perhaps some of you also picked up this book at an equally formative time of your life. Or perhaps there was another book that inspired you all the same. This is me as a teenager, about to have her life changed by reading this book. So I think back to this moment really, really often now, because my entire job now revolves around writing and teaching environmental literature. And this was my first encounter with it. That book, finding me at that moment in my life, it's one of those key things that set me on the path that I am now walking. So I'm actually really curious, before I sort of jump in, if there are any environmental books that have inspired all of you. Does anyone have any books that really sort of inspired them to engage with the environment?
I personally can't think right off the top of a book for me, but I don't know what others might. Oh, Scott says Walden.
Walden, yeah, that's a really popular one as well. Yeah, I hear that one quite often from my students. Anyone else have thoughts? You can have a think about it. I'm sure some will come to you.
Yes.
All right, so I think about this all the time as a sort of key moment in my journey into environmental writing. So I want to talk today about the role of literature in environmental movements. But really, what I mean to talk about, I think, is how our experiences of art, not just books, but the arts more generally, we might say, is actually a really crucial part of how environmental thinking, activism, conservation, and practice happens. Not in the sort of very concrete action of, say, like planting pollinator-friendly species or restoring wetlands, or the work that Derek does as a naturalist, for example. It's different than that, but in changing how people think about the environment, in those really sort of quiet, vulnerable moments when people, I think, are really open to change, right? Our encounters with art have that kind of power, you know, shaping how others might forge their own connections with the natural world, and advocating for and inspiring the kind of material changes that we need to see. So in art and literature, we often call this the affective component. You might think of this as the sort of emotional core of environmentalism, the things that, you know, make us change our minds, that motivate us, guide us in advocating for a livable world. So let's go back to that moment with Rachel Carson, me as a teenager. Silent Spring is widely credited with bringing a kind of environmental thinking, a concern for pesticides especially, to the wider public in an era when the use of DDT and other harmful biocides was really prevalent. It's considered a revolutionary book because it brought these concerns very much into the mainstream. Now, before I picked up that book, I had no idea that environmental writing like this was really a thing. I'd read a lot of novels, I would say, in which, and sort of, you know, picture books and just stories as a child, in which, you know, the setting, so land and plants and weather and animals, they all, you know, played a huge part. They were a huge theme. And I found myself gravitating towards these books originally because I really loved being able to think about place and nature and what we now, I think, often as academics will call the more than human worlds. But I didn't know when I was young, that there was this entire genre of writing about nature that was, you know, partly educational, partly activist literature, partly personal at times, until I picked up this book. And as a result, even though the work I do now is really quite different from what Rachel Carson did then, I think of it as a touchstone in my own career, a moment of transformation in my own life. So a bit of background. I went on to university where I studied environmental philosophy and sustainable development before going on to do a master's and a PhD, looking at ideas of beauty in nature and how they relate to historical conservation practices. So I did some field training in botany so that I could better understand what I was reading about in historical texts when I went on, you know, visits to field sites like parks that I was researching, when I was going through archival photos of landscapes I was writing about. And my original thinking, you know, going from that journey of being a student through my PhD, my original thinking was that I would go on to be a university professor, doing research in environmental history and aesthetics, working really on the ideas that inform environmentalism from this very theoretical perspective. But then the sort of big twist is that in the final year of my PhD, I got a book deal from a mainstream publisher, so not an academic publisher, but like a commercial publisher, to write about a book about swimming in lakes. This was me then. I had been writing blog posts up until then about the swims that I was doing in lakes around Berlin, where I live, and the blog had gotten somewhat popular. And the book at the time, it was meant to be a memoir, and it was meant to be informed by a lot of what I'd studied about environmental thinking, and was for a much more general audience than what I was doing with my PhD. So it required me to sort of make this kind of shift in thinking, okay, I'm not doing this just for students and scholars. I'm going to be writing for a much wider audience. I was sort of stepping into that mode of the thing that had so inspired me when I was young. And it wasn't really planned. So suddenly I was in that kind of crossroads moment. And I had the option, not just to pursue that academic path, but to become a nature writer. So I did. So since then, as was mentioned in the introduction, I've written a few books. I've popped some of the covers here. I've written 3 full-length nonfiction nature books, which sort of interweave that very personal voice with, you know, writing about environmental history, writing about botany, writing about conservation. So that's my books, Turning, Two Trees Make a Forest, and Dispersals, which is soon to be out. I've written 1 children's book, A Garden Called Home, also coming out soon. And I've edited a collection of essays about dogs called Dog Hearted. I've also just started work now on my 4th book, which is about freshwaters and biodiversity. Aside from my writing, I now teach creative writing at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And for many years, I was the editor of a literary journal called the Willowherb Review, which published nature writing by writers of color from all around the world. And that's a sort of important component of what I'm going to now talk about. So why books? Why environmental literature to begin with? So I mentioned earlier in my talk that before I'd read Rachel Carson, I'd found myself drawn to stories where landscape played a big part. Some of my favorite books when I was growing up were books like Island of the Blue Dolphins, which was about a young girl surviving alone in the wilderness, and Bridge to Terabithia, in which the forest was a kind of place of imagination and retreat. And when I started reading books when I got into high school, like Wuthering Heights, I found a kind of, you know, rugged, beautiful landscape that really inspired me. And while the portrayal of nature or our encounters with it in these books is not unproblematic, I think that these early artistic representations really shaped my own concern for the environment. I think that in many ways, this preoccupation with nature and environment and place, even in the early things I was reading, sort of set me in many ways upon a path of thinking about the environment seriously for the rest of my life and career. I found that very often I wanted to preserve a world in which this kind of natural beauty could exist. Books really inspired me to do that. You know, I felt really motivated to spend my time with the land as a result. So literature, just like visual art or music, it inspires people and it shapes our thinking about ourselves and our places in the world. For me, that was really profoundly true. But the one thing about this kind of power is that how it is wielded is really, really very important. So this is what I really want to talk about now. The way things are represented matters, as we know, because it shapes how much a person will feel included or invited into a conversation. So this is no less true for nature writing than it is for any other art form. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. When I started in nature writing in the genre, very much thinking about this within this sort of UK and North American sphere, I sort of occupy both spaces as a dual citizen between the UK and Canada. I go back and forth quite a lot, and my community, I suppose you could say my community of writers is really like both of those. I don't choose between them. But when I started out in this field, I found myself very suddenly surrounded by predominantly white, middle or upper class writers. And in Britain, I found that the term that was often used to make fun of nature writing by critics was the lone enraptured male. So if you think of like a posh man in his fancy wax coat with his dog walking across a hillside all alone, having a sublime experience of nature, that's kind of what that term is getting at. So this critique and the term came from an essay by the Scottish author Kathleen Jamie in 2008 in the London Review of Books, in which she said two things that I think really shaped the path of environmental writing since. So the first, I'm going to read this quote, is about how we think about wilderness. So she says, "Wild and not wild is a false distinction in this ancient contested country." So she means in Scotland and more widely in Britain. "The contests are far from over. When the wild is protected by management or recreated by the removal of traces of human history, you have to ask, who are these managers? Why do conservationists favor this species over that? Whose traces are considered worth saving? Who's fit only to be bulldozed?" So she's sort of asking us to really think about what it is we mean by wilderness and nature, particularly when it comes to conservation, but also nature writing and how we represent nature and wilderness. She then goes on to talk about how nature writing at the time was an exclusive sort of space. I will say, for context, in this piece, she was talking about a book by Robert Macfarlane that had recently come out. And this sort of critique has sort of been carried out to many other writers ever since, though I actually think Robert Macfarlane's done a really great job of staying current and really inclusive in his practice as a writer. But I'll read this quote. "When a bright, healthy, and highly educated young man jumps on the sleeper train and heads this way with the declared intention of seeking wild places, my first reaction is to groan. It brings out in me a horrible mix of class, gender, and ethnic tension. Who's that coming over the hill? A white middle-class Englishman, a lone enraptured male from Cambridge, here to boldly go discovering, then quelling our harsh and lovely and sometimes difficult land with his civilized lyrical words." So when I started out as a writer in 2015, not a huge amount had changed since Kathleen Jamie wrote that in 2008. I'm of mixed race heritage and am a third generation migrant. My roots are, as I said, are not set in a single place. And while I was extremely privileged to have had the opportunities I did, I didn't feel like the books I was reading in the genre and surrounding me were exactly for people like me. I was often brought onto panels at literary festivals when I started out, and these panels never included other writers of color or even those with similar migration histories. And when I was on those panels, I was repeatedly asked questions like, "Oh, can you tell us about, other writers of color we should be reading?" It became very, very evident that this genre that I really loved, that I pursued sort of, from a young age as this kind of passion, had a huge problem of representation, which meant that, like in other fields, it felt unwelcoming as a space for writers of color, disabled writers, queer writers, and more. Now, this doesn't mean to say that there weren't incredible writers of color working on environment, but that they weren't often seen as being part of the genre or part of that publishing space, which meant that the platform that could reach sort of a huge number of readers, it wasn't being offered to the writers who could really drive the genre forward. If we wanted environmental writing to have an impact on the wider world, I think it just became really clear to many of us working in the genre at the time that it needed to actually represent the complexity and diversity of that world. We needed to make the genre more inclusive. So in 2018, I founded the Willowherb Review as an online platform to publish nature writing by writers of color anywhere in the world. And I will say part of the sort of framing of that is because in the UK, there's a very famous nature writing prize called the Wainwright Prize. It's like the top nature writing prize. And that prize has a stipulation that the books that it considers have to be about Britain. As if, you know, nature can only be about one place, which I think is a huge limitation, and it excludes a huge number of voices, I think, then from the genre. So that was partly why I set up the Willowherb the way we did. You know, this way we could think about environment together in a way that transcended borders like that, especially in a moment when global climate change really just does not care about our borders. The idea was that if we could hear from a broader range of voices in a broader range of places, we might be able to generate a more holistic sense of what we mean by environment and how we might then advocate for it. So we launched this journal, and the submissions thankfully rolled in. In our first year, 70 submissions, of which we published, I think, 8 or 10, if I remember right, 150 the next, 320 the year after. Writers submitted from the UK, Colombia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Pakistan, the US, Canada, all over. And the work broadened my own understanding of what nature writing could be. So we saw, you know, speculative fiction playing with our potential futures to really formally inventive poetry that opened a space to ask questions about how family trauma can live on in places we've left. Experimental prose poetry playing with, you know, the power of water, essays on endangered species, and personal meditations on landscapes, even in video games. So here was a nature writing that took seriously the question of embodiment, you know, what it meant to be a person of color in the countryside, for example. Took seriously the idea that there is no neutral, universal experience of environment, and that our literature should represent that. So really, you know, what we were trying to offer was the exact opposite of that lone, enraptured male striding over the hillside. And the response from readers demonstrated a real appetite for this kind of shift. In 5 full issues and 3 special issues that we did over 5 years, we published 75 writers and reached 70,000 readers. And most importantly, I heard back repeatedly from writers that the space we opened up made them feel like environmental literature could be for them. Like they could take part in what had previously felt like a really exclusive club that didn't have room for their perspectives. You know, a space in which they weren't just tokenized and expected to write only about their identities, which I think was a really important component. And I should say this is just one of many initiatives that I think really, you know, started to sort of turn the dial a little bit within the genre. So one of a community of sort of activist responses that I think have taken place within literature in recent years. I want to read you a few examples of what this kind of nature writing can bring together and why I think this is a particularly exciting moment for environmental literature, if that's all right. So this is an excerpt from an essay by an author named Michael Mallet, who also has a book out now called Late Light, it grew out of this essay. This essay was called Night Fishing. And it's about eels. So I'm just going to read it to you because it's just so lovely. We're there for eels, in particular for the European eel, a creature known to science as Anguilla anguilla, but which anglers know by other names, Faus and gloat, gorb, scafling, snig. The eels are coming. Migrants of the high seas, they will have been traveling for years now, drifting along the highway of the Gulf Stream, across the freeway of the North Atlantic Drift, picking their way along ancient routes and water paths, driven all the while by the promise of fresh water, safety, home. When they arrive, they will be thin and fragile, soft and tender, barely 2 years old. Yet they will already be veterans of the ocean, with 3,000 miles under their belt. Their journey from the Sargasso Sea, a warm region of water in the North Atlantic, to the rivers and streams of Europe is one of nature's headier miracles. That one eel arrives is astonishing. That millions of eels arrive each year defies belief. I traveled from Bristol earlier that afternoon, taking a train to Gloucester before boarding a bus to Turley, a small village 8 miles north. After finding my accommodation for the night, a farmhouse that had been converted into a bed and breakfast, I went straight to sleep. It was 4 p.m. Get lots of rest, Andy had texted earlier that day. You're going to need it. When I open my eyes again, it is not to morning light, but to failing light, and not to the familiar trees of my garden, birch and hawthorn, but to a paddock full of cows. House martins chatter under the eaves. The sun hangs low in the sky. I turn on the radio. The news that day, the whole month, in fact, has been dominated by political scandal. The Home Secretary has just resigned. Ministers have been called in for questioning. The Prime Minister's track record is being scrutinized. It emerges that a systematic policy of detention and deportation has been in place, that citizens have been denied re-entry to their own country, that historic landing cards have been destroyed, jobs lost, that all over Britain, men and women who were born here or who emigrated here as children have had their futures put in doubt, have been told that they are not British. Almost exclusively, those affected by these policies are people of color, particularly members of the Windrush generation and their children. Again and again, a quote is discussed on the radio, an excerpt from an interview given in 2012. The aim is to create here in Britain a really hostile environment for illegal immigrants. The words of Theresa May, then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister. So, in this essay, Michael Malley he's able to sort of place these two stories alongside one another, and it doesn't really feel forced. He sort of alternates back and forth between this sort of political climate and the arrival of eels that he sets out to sea in the night. I found it so striking as a piece of writing and refreshing, if I'm honest. I also have a poem here to share. It's just an excerpt from a poem by a writer named Shilpa Kamath, called A Lake in Florida Suing to Protect Itself. And I'll just read a little bit of it. Finally, I think, a headline that is a poem. Finally, I think the collision of Indigenous sentiment and postmodern sentimentality and the law. When I was a kid, we drove up from Miami to stand in lines in the heat for a ride and another, then another, to see adults in familiar costumes, to buy mouse ear hats. I never knew this lake existed. Sometime soon, Lake Mary Jane may stream into the courtroom and refuse to be commodified. At the same time, someone may be rowing past Cypress knees as an egret wades. At the same time, I may be quaking in my Mary Janes, because I want this for the lake, because I want this for the forest. And by thee, I mean every. And by every, I mean for us to return to relating rather than objectifying, to trusting the old growth roots of our brains, of our tongues. When I was a kid and moved to Georgia, I fell in love with the pines and red clay, then watched in despair as they were destroyed to build more and more identical buildings. Strip malls facing strip malls with all the same items, with large lots and expansive roads before them. And I learned that I would have to drive for miles. And I learned that my house too was built where a forest once stood. So these are just a couple of examples of some of the work that came into the Willow Herb, and that I think, for me at least, reinvigorated my excitement about what environmental literature could do and the role it could play actually in a wider thinking of an environmental movement. So yeah, all of which is to say that my own journey as a writer, editor, and teacher of creative writing, it's really underscored to me, not just that environmental literature has power to inspire the wider public to care for the more than human world, but also that who is included in creating that literature is incredibly powerful and important. From the standpoint of environmental justice, I think, environmentalism is deeply embedded with power structures that exist in our society, and the artistic component of environmentalism is no exception. So in thinking about our present environmental crises, I want to point to not just the role of literature and inspiring folks, but also to say that I think this is a particularly exciting moment for us to, to reimagine what nature writing might look like if it's to be fit for our present world, and the world that's emerging. And I hope for some of you, it may seem like a space for you to have a voice too. So as you go back out into the world today, I'd really love for you all to think about, how you can inspire others to take, to care about and to feel included in environmental conversations, not just through information or facts, but through their emotions. Perhaps there's a short story you've wanted to write or an essay you've been assigned for class. Perhaps it's, passing an inspiring book along to someone who you think it may resonate with. I want you to remember how important that emotional component is when it comes to bringing about change. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Very good. I'll have Scott lead off on this.
Yeah, that was amazing. And the two literary examples that you gave were so moving and artistic. And I like you said, it didn't seem forced in the Michael Melee example, but the juxtaposition, that's a lot about what it is, isn't it? It is putting two things next to each other that helps you see both of them differently.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was thinking about other writers who fit into the genre you've been talking about. We did have, as a guest last year, Desmond had Evie Shockley, a poet who had recently completed a book, I believe, that she edited about Black nature poets, which was a really interesting example of writing in the genre. When I was a kid, I read Ernest Thompson Seton, and then in college read Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, other books like that. So there's a lot of beautiful nature writing. And I really like how you combine the political or activist aspect with a love for the aesthetic quality, which serves as an emotional trigger to be acting in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to actually move to a question. We have a surprising number of English majors or minors who are also majoring in science, like biology, but the two worlds don't really meet. Like they're studying crickets in a lab, and then they're analyzing a Shakespeare production in Chicago, but the world never joins together. But you've managed to pull that off. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the particular fusion of science and creative writing, which is not something that we run into in an everyday life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is partly to do with the background that I have educationally. Every degree that I did was very interdisciplinary, which in some sense, I sometimes think, oh, it would have been really great to have a single disciplinary training, but it also wired my brain in this way that it means I don't really respect disciplinary borders, which in some ways has been really helpful. As a creative writer, I think one of the most exciting things that we can do in our writing is bring life and attention to process. And this is something that I think where we want to bring science, we want to bring environment to the page. Writing those encounters, writing the work you're doing in a lab with crickets, for example, bringing that onto the page in a creative way is, I think, some of the most compelling kind of stuff we could be doing as writers. And this is, I come back to this with my students again and again, that it's not just about telling us the end result, right? We don't want to just hear about what you learned from the crickets. I want to see you handling the crickets in the lab. I want to see what the light is like in there. Is it clinically clean? What does it feel like in your hands? What are you smelling, right? And I think this is where it can get really exciting, to bring those two processes together. So I always see, when I encounter something that is scientific and often quite complex to me, because I'm a historian by training, even though a lot of the history I cover involves the history of science. I'm not trained as a scientist, but it does mean that sometimes I come up against material and I think, oh, this feels really opaque. So that's where my creative writing brain clicks in and says, okay, how do I make this not opaque? I'm gonna write through the process. I'm going to put that on the page in a way that is visceral and sensory and feels for the reader like they're, right there with me. And so I often talk about, I'll say to my students, if you've come across a piece of information that is really important and it's complex, rather than just explaining that information to your reader, take them to the library with you, paint a whole scene. I want to see you in the library with the books, encountering that material and struggling through it yourself on the page. And so I always find that it's just like, it's a good opportunity to immerse your reader, but also to create that vulnerability that in your voice as a narrator, it allows you to, I think, unpack a lot of those tropes of like the voice of authority from above. Like as a writer, you can show your own process, you can show your own learning, your own engagement with the world. And that I think just makes for so much more dynamic writing. So yeah, especially for students who are doing both sides, I think think about how you can write about one or the other, and write about that encounter.
So just carrying on with a follow-up to that, normally we think about, oh, I'm teaching or taking creative writing fiction, creative writing short story, creative writing nonfiction prose, poetry, whatever. What is the nature of the umbrella of creative writing that you're actually teaching? Because it sounds a little different from what we traditionally think about.
Yeah, so officially I teach creative nonfiction. The course I teach on, thankfully, we have an entire semester devoted to place, nature, and travel. And so I teach broadly on that module. But most of the writing I teach, I would generally call environment writing, or nature writing. And it can be quite broad. And I think this is what it's sort of frustrating at times, but also exciting. Like within the UK, within British nature writing, there's been some efforts to solidify what the current genre is. People call it the new nature writing, as like from the 1990s onwards. And that's, tracing back to earlier environmental writing and then all the way back to Romanticism as a tradition. But, really looking at the current iteration of the genre as the new nature writing being from the 1990s to now. There's that space, but then I think, US American environmental writing has had so many different iterations that don't necessarily fit tidily with the sort of Anglo side of that. So I don't know, I feel like I switch between different umbrellas all the time, but I would say, creative nonfiction, environmental writing is a great way of thinking about it. I look very often at the kind of work that would be published in a space like Orion Magazine for, I think, a really great example of what's possible out there right now.
Thank you. Okay, we'll open the questions up for other people. If you could identify yourself and give your question to Professor Lee, that would be great.
Yeah, I see a hand.
Go ahead, Grace.
Grace.
Yeah, hi, I'm Grace. So I'm an English major, and as I was listening to your talk, I was just so like, I felt like what you were telling us about like the lone and raptured like male stuff and like environmentalism. I realized as I was listening to you that like I feel like that was like a big part of the reason why in the past I felt very averse to, like the topic of environmentalism like in the first place. And this year, like Dr. Moncrief was saying, I took this like horticulture class, and at the same time I'm taking his class where we had like a environmentalist like literary theory like unit, and that was like very interesting to me because I felt like for the first time I was feeling like my discipline and like environmentalism like for the first time kind of combining, and like I had like a new interest, but at the same time I was feeling that like initial aversion as well of just like, this feels like a space that's not really for me, even though I've grown up in Oregon and stuff. But I think that as an Asian American, I also have like a very like different approach to the way that I think about nature just because of my parents and stuff. And so I love that you touched on that topic extensively just because, like we don't talk about it when it comes to like English stuff and like just like environmentalist literature. So I just wanted to ask, like, for yourself, how did you find like the motivation to just keep on going in your area of study, because it is oftentimes such an exclusive space, especially as a woman, and also just as a woman of color as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, really good question. So I think, one of the big culture shocks that I found when I came out of an academic space into like the creative writing space, into the publishing space, I found things to be way less diverse in the publishing space than they were in the academic space, if I'm honest. When I was doing my PhD, I was really inspired. We were reading thinkers like Anna Singh and we were reading, you know, people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I felt really like there was a very progressive kind of thinking happening within the environmental humanities within the bubble that I was working. And that was really exciting to me. And then I think the real frustration emerged for me when I got into like the literary publishing side of things, because it felt to me, and this is partly why I think I wrote my second book, was as a way of like processing a lot of these feelings, that there was like the nature writing space. And then there was the stuff that I actually really loved to read, which were a lot of like immigrant stories and, you know, like Zadie Smith novels and things like that, that like I really deeply identified with. And I remember at the time I said, okay, well, what if I could write a book that was both of those things, right? That was an immigrant story as well as a nature writing book. And it was really funny because my publishers were confused. You know, it was really, and it was a little bit demoralizing, but you know, I sort of stuck to my guns with it. And I said, okay, at the end of the day, you know, there's it's a Toni Morrison quote about, you know, like if the book you need to read is not out there, then like you have to write it. I'm just paraphrasing there. I was like, okay, this is the book I, at some point in my life, desperately needed to read. So this is the book I'm going to write. And that was my second book, Two Trees Make a Forest, which is here. And it's funny because I remember saying to colleagues who are very much, you know, in the diaspora writing space as novelists, I remember at the time saying, you know, I don't want this book to be pegged as a travel writing book. It's definitely a nature writing book, but I think it's also sort of diaspora literature. And they said to me like, oh, do you want it pegged that way? Because it is a little bit like those were separate worlds. And if you're a diaspora writer, you're a diaspora writer, and that's it, right? And I really wanted us to be able to reimagine things. So I don't know if the book pushed things ahead that much, but for me, it was really important to write and to come back to the community of writers that continued to like, and continue to this day to inspire me to do the work. And so I think really it was about that like really DIY ethos of like the other writers doing similar work, the other writers who had similar experiences, the readers who I knew needed to read this because it reflected an experience that they needed to see on the page, right? So I don't know, I come back to that again and again, thinking about writers like Nina Mingya Poles, who's like a New Zealand, Chinese Malaysian writer who lives in the UK, who writes a lot about her experience of environment and migration and belonging in really similar ways that I think I do. Coming back to those writers again and again, I think it's what like kind of encourages me to go on, that we're not on our own with it.
Okay, very good, very good. Other questions or comments?
Desmond, I can't find the raised hand, but
That's okay.
I wrote down the first thing I wrote down. This has just been an amazing presentation. I said unapologetically candid and right on. And one of my colleagues, I think, just left the call, Heather, but we work in the environmental justice arena all the time. And what I find is that the people we work with, their story is what compels us to be better as scientists, as environmental health scientists. So we bring those stories in to our work. I see Commissioner Adams is on. One of the stories was watching Mary Alice Adams talk to John Yang on national public television and say some of our people don't know what a part per billion is when dealing with a lead crisis. And I said, I have to do something about this. So we did a training, but I just wanted to thank you for telling the truth, recognizing the inequity in publishing, in who gets to be heard, how people are portrayed, and just really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurel. And I also want to say, The Hidden Life of Trees, an amazing book. And Peter is like one of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to. So I wholeheartedly recommend all of these books.
And the over story is another one I really loved about forests, the mother tree. So thank you for your presentation.
All right. Anyone else? While you guys are formulating I do have a couple of comments. One is the phrase, the more than human world. I like that phrase. First time I heard it, but it really rings really nice.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I feel so.
then-
That's it. Comes out of a lot of the environmental anthropology space. People like Anna Singh, but it's the idea that it's it's not oppositional to us. It's beyond us. It's more than us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So now, usually, at least for me, when I hear the word aesthetics, I only think of it in terms of beauty.
Mhm.
But in nature, nature actually has both beauty and brutality. I mean, that's just part of life, of nature. In nature writing, do you see, because I could see interpreting the night fishing piece by Michael as a way, first of all, of looking at the beauty, right? In the first initial paragraphs, and then the brutality later on. Are there other examples of that sort of contrast and juxtaposition, as my friend said, Scott?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think this is a really important component of why I think the aesthetic is a sort of important way of thinking about what environmental literature can do, because it's, as you said, it's not just beauty, right? If we think of the aesthetic traditionally in philosophy, it includes ideas like the sublime. But I also think built into this is, experiences of ugliness, of brutality, of things that are really emotionally triggering in ways that are not entirely positive. And so coming back to that as like its power to motivate change, I think is huge. And actually, if you think of the first example I offered of Rachel Carson, part of the reason that book was effective was that she juxtaposed, the sort of beauty of hearing songbirds with the complete absence and destruction of that habitat, right? And that is an incredibly powerful and motivating juxtaposition. So yeah, I think it's like we can't just have both, and I don't think it works. So even in my own writing, it's about, I think, often calling to mind that tension that there are really beautiful things to preserve, and we need to motivate people to do so, but also to like really not to gloss over, not to look away from the horror that is happening. So writing both simultaneously, it's a challenge, and I think it's the task at hand very often.
Yeah. I have another point to make, but I'll again see if other persons have any comments or questions. Pat in Trinidad, do you have any question or comment?
I'm just thinking, this is this has been an absolutely fantastic experience in a way. It shows how you combine facts with emotion much more than we are necessarily trained to do. I mean, normally a scientist is there to kind of portray facts and take out the emotions. I mean, this is a combination, and I think it's definitely makes me understand why I prefer to read than to watch. Does that sound strange? Because you get so much more from the written word. That and I would just like to say thank you very much for giving me a great deal of food for thought. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's the nuance that is possible in a book, like I said sort of earlier on, that being able to reach people in that slow, vulnerable moment where they're open to change, right? Because books are slow, you have time to change people's minds, that a TikTok video or something, just you don't have the time, right? That kind of impact of today's culture, which I love and it has its place, but I think for the sort of really slow mind changing that has to happen, very often books are the best medium.
Yeah, you can roam free.
Yeah. So in my chemistry lab classes, I always, either whether it's at the high school level or college, they all have to, of course, write a technical final lab report, but I always require that they also write a narrative about their experience, because especially for many of them, this is the first time they're doing a lab. And not just repeating what's been done before, but a lab that is independent, that is on the edge of discovering something. And so, yeah, we try to incorporate that in having them all do something, not just in terms of a technical report, but a more experiential, you know?
Yeah, it's huge. It's so important because at the end of the day, like science is not done in a bubble, right? It's done by people, and that lived experience contributes to what that science produces.
Exactly, exactly. So I have a little question about something I've thought about. So during springtime, we have the dandelions, right? And if you do some research on it, at one point they are considered okay. At another point, they're considered weeds. And I've like, it's the same dandelion, why? But we have different labels on them. And who is sitting up and deciding for us whether the dandelion should be a weed or, you know, something to cherish? And in fact, if you do the research, you will see that dandelions do have at least some folk medicinal properties and all that type of stuff. The reason I'm bringing that up is because in one of your passages, you talked about the conservationists, you know, picking and choosing different species.
Yeah, so it's actually the core question in the heart of my next book is actually unpacking this question about how we think about species, how we culturally frame a species, or how I've put it, a plant out of place. And that could be a plant that, you know, is an invasive species, to use one term. Could be a plant that we've extracted through colonial botany and put somewhere else, a plant that we've collected to use as a crop, and then changed in order to meet our needs, right? Like those are cultural framings that, of course, they relate to science, and there's important conservation work that is tied to them, but that we need to interrogate a little bit more what it is we mean when we describe a plant that way. And bringing up the example of the dandelion, I think it's a great example because that is, you know, it's a species that is native to Britain and is everywhere else now.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Alfred Crosby, who was a really famous environmental historian, has a quote from his book Ecological Imperialism that says, "The sun never sets on the empire of the dandelion."
Okay. That is so true.
Right, but it's not unlinked to colonial histories and empire, right? That the spread of that particular species is very deeply tied.
No, that I didn't know, that it's from Britain, because we have it here all over Michigan when
everywhere.
Yeah.
Right, but it does particularly well anywhere where we also have a lot of lawns. Right. And so then we get into whole other conversations around like weeds and lawns and how they interrelate. And yeah, it's sort of, you know, we can't talk about one species in isolation very often. But I think this is what I really love about this kind of writing, is that you can tell those stories and you can unpack them and say, you know, let's actually really take this species seriously for a moment.
Laurel, what did you say about the dandelions?
They're delicious, steamed with olive oil and lemon.
Are you serious?
So delicious.
What?
Dandelion greens. And I live on Lake Michigan, and sometimes I'll see people out. Of course, I'm a dog lover. I'm a dog mother. So I would never eat anything on that path because it has been blessed with the urine of thousands of dogs and everything else. But people collect dandelion greens, and they're really, really delicious. You can buy them sometimes, and they're a lot of Greek restaurants will have them, you know, steamed with a little olive oil and lemon, and you just need some good crusty bread, and it's a great vegan meal.
They're super nutritious.
Wow.
Yeah.
Laurel?
Yes.
Water in my mouth. When could I get some of your steamed dandelions?
You know,
they taste like turnip greens. That's right. A little bit bitter.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Like tiller
yeah.
greens.
You should be eating greens every day, Desmond.
I know, right?
This actually reminds me, we also have an essay in the Willow Herb Review, I think in issue 2, that is about dandelion greens and other bitter greens.
Wow.
I think it's
I
called
am
Chinese.
learning so much today. This is so cool.
I'm
Grace,
sorry
did
that
you
I
have
teach
another question
virtually.
you would
I
like
could
to-
cook.
Grace, I was just asking if you had another question that you wanted to ask.
Oh, well, I don't know. I guess I could if I wanted. You um so can you talk more about like just like the intersection of like, like plants that you see in Taiwan versus like North America, and just how you think that like the mindset, I guess, differs from like the two countries, and like how you think that intersects as you are like a third generation, and like, how that impacts the way that you see nature versus like, common Western like view, even in environmentalist terms, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I think there's like a few different aspects to that. One, and the thing that actually led me to write my most recent book is one aspect of it, which is when I was hiking in the high mountains in Taiwan to write my second book, there was one species in particular I came across that was just incredibly beautiful. And I stopped, and the smell was like, it smelled like almonds in the air. And it was just like this beautiful little flower. I got down on the ground and I looked at it really closely, and I looked up what the species was. And as it turned out, it was, within its native range in Taiwan and the Philippines, perfectly fine. But in North America and elsewhere is considered like a really terrible invasive. And so that for me, I think, was an important moment in terms of thinking, okay, I want to take more seriously this question, right? Of borders and belonging, how it applies to plants, how it applies to people. So there was that component, but I also think, it was really interesting to me spending time in Taiwan as, sort of part of the diaspora coming back. Very often I found people who'd grown up in Taipei would say to me, oh, I've never been up hiking in those mountains, or we don't go into that forest. Because it, like, part of the culture, I think, of spending a lot of time hiking and things like that, it's such a, there is an aspect of it that has become like a very like Western, Anglo-American or like European American trope, right? That it's like, we're the outdoorsy people who come do this, which is a complete erasure of the fact that people have lived with these mountains for centuries and know them and know, like they have this deep, intimate knowledge of the land, and it gets stamped over and erased. And increasingly people grow up in the cities without connecting to that own knowledge from their own culture. And then have this like imposed, very Western idea of like, let's go on this hiking group tour in this place. And so that was an interesting sort of dynamic and encounter that I came across really often. But yeah, I mean, thinking about the plants, there's so many layers to this. I also was really struck by the fact that, as an environmental historian who studied botany, I did so within the frame of like temperate European landscapes. That's what I know. That's what my training was in. So you stick me like in a park in Western Europe or in the UK, and I'm like, I can name things for you. We're good, right? You stick me in Taiwan and I have no idea. But my mom, on the other hand, who knows none of the plants, where my mom lives in Southern Ontario, not far from many of you, she doesn't know any of the plants there, but you stick her in Taiwan and she will start telling you all of the plants. And I realized that this was intergenerational knowledge, right? That I needed to let her pass down. And it was a really sort of core experience for me. I think just sort of underscoring that, we couldn't always share the same language. We didn't always have the same words for plants. I might know the Western name, like an English name for something, or a Latin name, a binomial for something. And my mom would tell me this like Chinese folk name for it. And sometimes she would describe it in those terms, and then I would look it up and I couldn't find it anywhere, right? Because that name didn't directly translate. And it just became this process for me of realizing how entangled we as people are and our cultures are with those plants, and by default them with us through our naming of them, and the way those names sort of layer onto one another. And I don't know, it brought home for me that sort of intimacy of environment, and that, we need to talk to one another. We need to share with one another. And it's like asking my mother the name of plants was like, I don't know why I hadn't done it sooner. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's like many layers to that experience for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family every year, my dad, he likes to take us and like go like mushroom picking in like local like just like areas and stuff like that. And it's like this like plant that's like really common in Korea, just like used in cooking and stuff, but like here no one knows about it. And so they kind of just treat it like an invasive like species. And like when we go like to the sides of like mountains and stuff and like we bring back like huge like trash bags full of this like like specific mushroom.
Is it
And
matsutake?
people always look at us like we're crazy.
Yeah.
It's very good, yeah.
If you haven't read The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh, I would look at that book. I feel like you might enjoy it. Sorry, if you hear my toddler, she's just coming home from nursery.
Are there groups, books, links, associations for nature, environmental writers and writing that you could share with us? If not now, you could send it to me and I could send it out too.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send you some more links, but off the top of my head, I would say, check out the writers we've published with the Willow Herb Review at thewillowherbreview.com. Have a look at some of the writers who've been supported by a prize called the Nan Shepherd Prize in the UK. That's like a big emerging writers space, and the work that they've been supporting has been absolutely really incredible. Most of my contacts for this are within the UK space. But I'll put together a sort of a bigger list of things to check out, because I think there's such incredible work happening just sort of within every publishing space right now.
Okay.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So sometimes we use language as a tool for identifying something, you name it, and then you know it and you're done with it in a way, or you've solved it. How do you use language as a tool for opening up mystery and curiosity rather than closing off things?
Yeah. I think it's something that I've had to learn and get comfortable with as a writer. The example I would come to is when I was writing Two Trees Make a Forest, I had this idea that I was going to go out and write this story of discovering or rediscovering my own connection to the place where my mom grew up, Taiwan, and learning all of the stuff about my grandparents' families, like history and their lives. And that if I answered those two questions, it would feel like a completing of the circle. And part of that thinking was that there was a part of me in my brain that was like, I'm going to hike to a top of a mountain and it's going to be clear and beautiful and I'm going to see everything around me and I'm going to write that. And of course, every hike I did while working on that book was pouring rain, fog, clouds everywhere. There isn't a single hike I do in that book where I get a view. Wow. And I think it was a really important lesson because I had to write the cloud. I had to write fog. I had to write just not knowing and getting comfortable with that. And I know there are probably some readers who read this book and they're like, this is terrible. I don't get a resolved ending, but I think it's much truer to life and getting comfortable with leaving things unresolved, leaving questions open, rather than clamping down with answers, as you say. And so for me, it was about getting comfortable with that as a practice as a writer, right? That almost like, not saying I'm going to have the last word, saying, okay, I'm going to leave this here. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I think we have learned, at least I know I've learned a lot today. This was really, really interesting episode. And we want to thank you so very much, Jessica, for leaving us with mystery, fogs and clouds, curiosity. We want to thank my friend and colleague, Scott Moncrief. And want to thank everyone. Derek, here at the Love Creek. Thanks to everyone that came on and asked questions, participated, listened. Thank you so very much. Next week, we'll have our final for the semester, final episode on marine biodiversity in the Caribbean. I wish everyone a great day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Justin.
Okay, all right.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was amazing.
It was. Stay safe, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Very informative and enjoyable and mind-opening.
Yes.